Hello, 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 everyone.
Hola.
Hello,
Hi.
panelist. Do you remember when that intro used to be very jittery? It's smooth as a baby's bum now, isn't it? That's quite good.
I must admit, I don't have a lot of reference points for the smooth baby's bum, to be fair. Okay. I don't even know if they are got that smooth. I'm only relying on what people tell me.
They can be pocked and wrinkled from my experience. Okay, so right, people. So just a little bit of housekeeping, and the usual thing that the best way to engage with the chat is on my YouTube channel, and we don't charge anyone to comment. So chat away, and we will address your comments as they arise. Okay, so that bit's done. Do you want to do a few hellos, Wendy?
Yes, who we got here? Vegan Cannibal. We were just saying we haven't seen you, Vegan Cannibal, for a while. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Terry as well. Welcome back. Nice to see you again. And we have Jeremy the 8th. Good to see you, Jeremy. And Deb. Actually, I'm really glad Deb's here. Cheeky Monkey Jeremy. I'm really glad Deb's here because Deb has a lot of wisdom about horses, being the carer of some horses. So that would be great to have Deb's perspective on all of this when we get onto that article. We have got Spiritual Vegan Jennifer. Lovely to see you, Jennifer. Natasha's here. Welcome, Natasha. And Linda is here as well. Great to see all of you. And yeah, looking forward to your comments as well. So do join in. Say hello if you haven't already, if you're here.
So Wendy,
we had
okay, no, Carolyn, sorry about that.
I just want to ask Wendy about her weekend, and if you could fill us in. You had some interesting stuff going on.
Yes, I was at a vegan party. It wasn't really a party. It was, I didn't do much partying at all. It was a vegan party conference, which was organised by Tim Barford and his esteemed team, who did a brilliant job of organising. I just can't even begin to imagine the kind of work that organising something on that scale takes. Just must be a logistical nightmare, just bringing so many people together because there were so many things going on at the same time. It was at Kensington Town Hall, which is a really good event venue, actually. There's a huge hall where we had lots of panels. There was a smaller hall where there was talks going on. There were a few rooms with workshops going on all at the same time. There was a floor where there were stall holders. Some of those stall holders were people running campaigns, like Camp Beagle were there represented, a few other people, and other people kind of just to do with other animal issues or nature issues and things like that. So, and then of course there was some food. It wasn't the same as Veg Fest where there's a whole hall of food, but there was food just kind of dotted around and some really lovely vegan friendly foods around as well. So it was a really interesting weekend, and I was on 2 panels there. One was the Beyond the Welfare Paradigm, and the other, which I was really especially pleased to be on, was called Language Matters. And so it was really good to be able to talk about the language in a different format, on a different platform, and to a different audience as well. So yeah, it was great. And it was a lot of interesting panels going on, lots of people from different places within the movement, everything from kind of what an interesting panel I saw yesterday was putting an end to animal so-called testing, and that was quite an interesting panel. There were scientists on there, as well as Tom Harris, who some of you may know is a long-standing grassroots activist and has a book out all about the Shack campaign, and also a co-director of Lush, and just coming from different angles and perspectives. So there was a lot of interesting things going on from very different arenas of the movement. So
are there recordings of the discussions?
There will be recordings. They're not visual, though. I think they're just going to be audio, but I'm not sure when they will be ready or anything. And actually, Alan was there. Vegan Alan Radio was here. Good evening. It was great to see Alan there as well. And I also got to see Philip, who's not here because I think he's flying back to New York. He was there in the flesh. So I got to actually meet IRL, Philip Murphy, who is usually in our chat. So good to sort of see some old faces and meet some new ones, make new connections and things like that. All those events are always good for that, aren't they? I think they can be quite inspiring. That's what I really look to them for, is how can we get people inspired to become more active in the movement, to do more, to get up off their smooth baby bottoms and take more action. That's what it's all about.
You had one of those situations where there was more than one thing going on at once. I always find that very frustrating at conferences myself.
Yeah, I suppose in a way it's pros and cons, because I suppose the more content there is, the more likely people will attend, because there'll be something that draws everyone in. And yet on the other side of that, you have to choose. So yeah, sometimes you clash with other things going on, which is unfortunate, but yeah.
And was your language one well attended?
It was actually. It was sometimes hard to tell how many people were there. It was such a huge room, and people would kind of spread themselves out throughout this room. I think it had a capacity for like 300 people or something. But it was quite well attended, and actually we had time for audience questions as well, which was really interesting, because like the other panel, we didn't get time for that, and a lot of panels that I saw didn't have any audience interaction, but we did actually have a time for a couple of questions. So that was interesting. And actually I might ask you folks, and Jeremy's here as well, one of the questions that got asked, because I was using fellow animals and explained why I was using fellow animals, an activist asked the question, does fellow animals have a little bit of a gendered kind of connotation, the fact that it's fellow, which obviously often relates to men fellows. And I know that it's used in a different way here. It's our fellow as in we've got a commonality, but it is a good point to consider as well. So I said thank you, and I'm going to put some thought into that. And yeah, I can't remember. Oh, the other one was about suffering, because I was saying how, I made the point about moving away from just using language like cruelty, abuse and love and all of that stuff, and not only focusing on suffering and talking about fundamental wrongs. And then somebody said that that they were a survivor of abuse, and actually suffering is very important to them, and also important to get people feeling empathy and compassion for others, especially for other animals. So what was my view on that? And I said something like I wouldn't want to dismiss anyone's suffering, and I think it is important that we do acknowledge suffering. We do acknowledge the experience of our fellow animals, what they're going through. We can't just dismiss their experiences, and there is a lot of suffering involved. But I was saying on the other side of that, we don't want to lose. We miss out a lot of individuals if we only focus on suffering. That it's important that we go beyond the suffering. That was my point really, and do talk about the moral atrocities, fundamental wrongs, and the actual use, rather than just the type of use and that kind of thing. So it was quite an interesting chat actually, and really good perspectives from the other panelists as well. Oh, Nella, I don't know if you're frozen. Oh, you're back.
Okay, because I lost you for a moment. My take on this is that we should have a balance, keep a balance when we talk about suffering, but I believe it should be acknowledged and it should be mentioned, because it's an emotional word. And apart from the reasonable arguments, I think that we should use emotional ones, because humans are far more emotional than reasonable. So by excluding everything that is emotion based, we make our arguments less strong.
Yeah.
Well, I'd agree with that, and I mean that's what Reagan said, wasn't it? As well, it's a mix. But then, we've said it before on this show that no words are banned and all that. It's to do with the preponderance of them, and so the skill of talking about vegan animal rights is to contextualize things. And so if somebody wants to start talking about veganism and suffering, cruelty and suffering, that kind of stuff, you can do that for a few seconds, and then you need to contextualize it into the wider position of vegan animal rights. And it's as kind of simple as that in a way. Whereas the problem is when you get stuck in the welfare paradigm and only talk about cruelty, which you see a lot of advocacy doing. And that's when then you're not actually expanding the conversation away from welfarism, I think.
What we usually do is to mention suffering along with rights violations, like not one or the other. In a way, present them together, but what is going on is like the violation of basic rights, like freedom, life, etc. But at the same time, explaining that inflicting suffering is an immoral thing to do. Anyway, so I found that if you use, all kinds of arguments, it's more effective. But I think it's also important to to make sure you are in the right context when you have these conversations. Make sure make clear from the beginning what are you standing for, so there is no misunderstanding about welfarism and things like that.
Well, don't forget the fundamentals is the important part. Carolyn, going back to the fellow, because presumably it was a feminist-inspired question. So
yeah, sure, it was.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would kind of go with Jeremy here. But what about you, Carolyn?
I think it's a kind of a difficult one. I mean, I guess we would ask, what are the alternatives, like non-human animal, other animal? And I guess I can see pros and cons to each of those options. I mean, I say non-human animals, other animals, and our fellow animals. I just kind of use all three of those because I feel like none of them is perfect, but they all do a pretty good job of communicating what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, we were saying something similar to that actually the other day, weren't we, Roger? That we kind of interplay with those three.
Yeah.
And although all of them have
them have got some problems to it. I think, directly to Jeremy's point, though, that obviously words have got different meanings. And if you've got to take into account every single meaning of every single word, or, every different dictionary definition or something, then you've got a problem, because that's going to actually exclude loads of stuff. Whereas obviously when you say our fellow animals, it's nothing to do with fellow equals males. I mean, I think that's fairly well understood. I think that's how I would think of it. So I'd agree there with Jeremy, but I think that we should always be open to critique of that, self-reflexive and all that. And
that's what I said to the questioner. Actually, I said that it's about being open. It's not about thinking you've got it right and that's the end point. It's about being open and questioning and challenging and being playful and innovative, rather than let's stick to this and make this is the right thing to do. Like, always challenge. And maybe it's contextual as well. Like going back to Nella's point about the emotive language, and I think Alan's brought it up as well, and Jeremy's mentioned it, about we need to use emotive language. It doesn't always have to be treatment based, but also it depends on context. Like if you've only got a poster and you've got 3 words, then I suppose it's choosing those words really carefully. Like if you're going to focus on cruelty and abuse in the 3 words you have, then obviously you haven't got a chance to expand on that. If you're having a conversation with someone, you can more easily expand and say, right, the suffering, yes, but how about, we take it wider and show the actual fundamental wrong of the use. So it depends where you are, who you're chatting to, where the language is being used, I guess.
Since we are on the fellow or non-human or other animals topic, I would like to ask you all the question. Usually, I use other or non-human because fellow animals does not translate in Greek. So when I'm with Greek people, I cannot use it. In English, it sounds like the best choice to me, at least better than non-human, but because I'm thinking that it's weird to define someone, our fellow animals, but what they are not, like non-humans. Like you have humans in one side and all the other non-humans on the other, which is sometimes necessary, but it sounds not very egalitarian. And in a way,
saying a non.
yeah, in a way, it's a dualism, like humans and non-humans. So I'm a bit worried about that. I still use it, and I would love to hear what you think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you. Oh, sorry, Carolyn. Go ahead. I was just going to say that not. You wouldn't say non-man for a woman. So yeah, it wouldn't.
Or non-white.
Non-white. Yeah, absolutely. Carolyn, sorry. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I guess couldn't the term "our fellow animals" technically also mean humans? Sometimes I feel like when I'm speaking, I feel like it's helpful to say non-human to be very clear if I'm only talking about those animals who are not human. Yeah, I think it sort of depends on the context, personally.
It's all to do with contextualization, folks.
Absolutely.
Right. So, do you think we should move on to our article, or have you got anything else to say about the conference, Wendy?
No, I think that was pretty much it. Just good. It was overall pretty positive.
I wanted to ask you whether the talk about the language one, I'm really interested in. I mean, was it very basic, or was it about things like trying to influence people not to use it language, or was it more kind of, about messaging or something?
Yeah, all of it actually, and that was my takeaway, because at the end they were saying, what's your, like, you've got 30 seconds, give us a takeaway, and I said, right, never ever call our fellow animals it ever again, and join learning unspecies language on Facebook. And it was like, okay, that was my call to action. So I really drove that point home a few times in the thing, but from the other panelists and as well, and the host and one of the other panelists were both from Animal Think Tank, and they spend a lot of time researching language and narratives. And actually, Natalie, who was a co-panelist, had also read Joan Denea's book and was very interested by that. And we were discussing that book, and like between us, and she and I were very aligned on a lot of things. We found even before the panel that we were kind of working on similar messaging and working to minimize change euphemisms and downplaying and disconnective language and language that kind of consolidates the human animal dichotomy and those kind of things. So it wasn't very basic and simplistic, but we did also mention simple examples, like we were all giving examples of metaphors that we use. Or one example I gave was not calling, in our campaigns, which you see a lot of, is dairy cows, and I'm saying they're not dairy cows, they're cows who are being oppressed and their milk is stolen and their babies are murdered and things like that. So I was trying to give like simple examples as well. So it was kind of a little bit of a mixture, but it did go further into messaging and campaigning and how we can look at things as activists and advocates, and also in our general conversations and our own inner language with ourselves and our own relationships with our fellow animals as well. That was one thing that I spoke about, is how my languages and my attitude and relationships with other animals have co-evolved in a very positive way. Like the more I explore and challenge my language, the stronger and more respectful my relationships become, and vice versa. The more I'm open to respectful relationships, the more I realize the language isn't suitable and is oppressive and tyrannical. So there was a lot of talk about that kind of thing. So
yeah, Alan says you don't get enough time to expand, which is always a frustration on a panel, isn't it? So yeah,
true, very true.
There is no pure land, as we say. In fact, we're going to get a little bit of assigning our fellow animals with the job, as it were, in the article. The final thing I want to say about our fellow animals bit, though, is that, you mentioned Joan Denier. I'm assuming you talk about her first book, Animal Equality, Language and
yeah.
Liberation. Yeah.
Mhm.
Now, in that, of course, there's that famous thesaurus towards the end. When I reviewed the book, I think it was 2001, I think it came out, I think. I said that this new language won't catch on. And I think the same probably goes with our fellow animals. I don't think the movement is going to start using it in a widespread sense. I mean, generally speaking, they don't even say other animals.
No.
And so I think that part of that is that they would push back against us and say, what's the point of using words that people don't understand?
Carolyn.
Sure. Well, surely they would understand our fellow animals. I mean, I think other animals sometimes does maybe confuse people because they think other, what do you mean other? But if we say our fellow animals, then surely people can see that means we're talking about, like we're referring to the fact that we are also animals.
I think fellow animals sounds very clear even to non-native speakers. It's very clear what one means by saying our fellow animals, and yeah, I don't think it creates confusion. And it's very easy to use around non-vegans too, because they get the point. I found other animals more confusing. So I don't see any reason for people not to adopt fellow animals.
It is with some other, especially some of the words that Joan Denier recommended, some of them might be a bit more difficult for some people to understand, but then of course we can always explain to people what the words mean that we're using.
I guess it's a question of, in a conversation, you kind of don't really want to use language which is going to kind of make people stop, which is one of the arguments against using, the R word and even Holocaust and, references to slavery. You kind of want the conversation to flow, and anything that's going to make people kind of jolt a little bit can be a problem in terms of social interaction.
Yeah, I suppose going back to Carolyn's point, because that's true, very true as well, Roger. I think that's a lot of the pushback, isn't it? Is alienating people as well in our language, confusing people, alienating people, stopping the conversation, but also sometimes maybe stopping the conversation if someone's going to ask a question is a good transbreaker, and as long as you can get a chance to explain. And I think going back to what Carolyn said, it's important that we educate ourselves or teach ourselves how to tell someone else about what we're saying and understand why we're saying it, because I think there's a big fear around being bold with language, and that's something that Natalie was saying, actually, my co-panelist, about being bold with our language. But there is a fear about it, maybe because we don't quite understand it yet ourselves, but I think maybe that's down to us also just to evolve our own knowledge and understanding of how we communicate, that we can then be more bold with and innovative with the language and be able to explain it to people why. Because I think if people ask questions, not that people often do, but if they do, then it's a great opportunity to explain in a respectful, calm way of why we're saying these things. And that's great advocacy, isn't it?
For people who notice that Nella's screen's gone blank, she wonders that would happen because there's a big fire going on in Greece, and Nella is part of the search and rescue campaign or movement or whatever you want to call it, and so we kind of knew that was going to happen. Just so there's not a problem in case people are wondering.
Just want to say hello to Louisa Moss. We haven't seen you for a long time, Louisa. Welcome back. And also we have a Ritik. Welcome. Haven't seen that name before, but good to see you.
I did an interview with him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, Green Scare podcast. Highly recommend it. Yeah. Do you have controls at the moment?
I think I do. Yes.
No, it's definitely amazing doing that. It's hard work and very kind of traumatizing as well, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yes. I was discussing the early ALF as ever. Right. Okay. Let's get this machine up, shall we? Right. So this is we were wondering about whether we would run out of content, but we've only just finished the intro, Wendy.
We never run out of content. We actually always run out of time. That's the way it always is, isn't it?
So, so do you want to give us your general impression? This is your idea, this particular article.
The reason actually, it was when we decided we were going to start presenting news items again, and I found this article when it was just fresh. From the Telegraph back in August, but I couldn't access it for a while because you had to subscribe to the Telegraph, and I thought, I'm not doing that. But eventually managed to get hold of it. But when I read it, I thought it was just so interesting because there are so many interesting points, movement points, wider points about speciesism, points about welfareism, points about language, and I just thought, and it's got so many different layers to it and different elements. Some more positive than others, and I just thought it was quite an interesting one to explore. And also for me, something I've realized a lot is recently and think about a lot is that horses are so oppressed in so many different ways. Like if we think about socialized categories, they cover so many of those categories, don't they, in terms of so-called companions. In sport, they're used in sport, they're used in the military, they're weaponized. They're used not so much here in the UK, but they're used for their flesh for consumption, and just in so many ways, and especially in the entertainment industry. Like you can't turn on a program or watch a film without someone is sitting on a poor horse's back, including certain vegans, of course. But yeah, so I just thought it'd be just an interesting one to explore. That was the reason behind it.
Yes, that was a bit of an in-joke, that people, because Ronnie Lee messaged us about an hour ago and said he's Joaquin Phoenix going to be the guest panelist because of the fact that, So, Carolyn, your first kind of thoughts about the article in general?
Oh, well, I mean, overall, I felt that it was a speciesist article, although there were some aspects to the article that sort of started to challenge speciesism. I mean, yeah, I have there are a lot of things that I think about this article.
Okay, well, we'll come to them as we come to them then. My general point is actually related to you, Carolyn, in the sense that it made me think about your interview with Matthew Cole, which is only just out as well. People always for animal rights podcast, and Matthew said that kind of it's almost like when you kind of get vegan eyes, you see the world in a different way, right? And I was thinking that vegans reading this article will come up with stuff that most people probably would just go straight vum kind of thing. And I was thinking in those terms, and I think we'll see that as we proceed. So the first bit that you highlighted, Wendy.
Yeah, that's what I highlighted. But actually, I don't know. Oh yeah, no, I was just going to say about the first paragraph that I really related to that because, and I don't know if anyone here does as well, but when I was a little girl, I was absolutely obsessed, and I mean obsessed, by horses. And I don't know where that came from, but it seems to be quite a common thing. And I don't know if it's socialized into us that girls are meant to like horses and have this bond, or whether it's a natural affinity towards horses that we've evolved over time. I just don't know, but I was absolutely obsessed, and I was desperate to have a horse, always at the top of my Christmas list. Now, thankfully, we were poor, so we didn't have that kind of money, and I was always devastated every Christmas. And I sadly, I did get to ride, so-called ride. I did get to sit on horse's back to ride about twice, I think, as a little girl, and obviously it is not great, but obviously at that age you don't know what you're doing. But I'm so thankful that we didn't have any money and that I couldn't have regular lessons on horses' backs, and we didn't ever have a horse. So I'm just really grateful. But I think it's quite a common thing. I don't know if anyone relates to that. But yeah, so the first bit I highlighted was really interesting because this person, Wheeler, was saying that she witnessed people being thrown off, like horses throwing humans off her back, but they'd call her moody or a bad horse. But right from the start, she was sensing that the horses didn't enjoy it, and over time very much learned that horses should not be ridden. And now this person runs a sanctuary for horses, and she cares for 21 of the horses, and 13 of them live in a herd. I don't know how we feel about the herd language, but live in a group, and as close to their natural way as possible. But yeah, I think she just had that natural sense that the horses weren't enjoying that. But of course, most people would just see that as misbehaving, as being naughty, as like being mischievous, as not being obedient. And that's the general way we look at things, isn't it? So that was what I kind of came, the reason I highlighted that.
Yeah, I noticed the ableist language right at the beginning, which is quite interesting. But also, I did pick up on the herd thing, because I was thinking that's how the situation at Vine, isn't it, Wendy?
Yes. At Vine Sanctuary, it's very much multi-species interaction. There's no segregation like in many sanctuaries where different species of individuals are separate from each other. They tend to just muddle along with each other and have these really interesting multi-species relationships, and live as close to natural as possible. So, for example, they have chickens living out in the forest, cows who just live out in the forest as well, and have friendships with each other and all these things. Chickens sitting on the cows' backs, which I think is allowed for them. I think it's consensual by the sounds of it. So yeah, really interesting.
Symbiotic, no doubt. So do you have a note or two for this opening bit, Carolyn, or should we move on?
Yeah, well, we could even question saying Rachel Wheeler was young when she first learned to ride. That language, ride, I mean, is that species as language? I wonder. It doesn't even say ride on horses' backs. It just says ride. As though that is the natural thing for humans to do. I wonder.
Yeah, it could be bicycles, I suppose, but obviously it's specialist language, Wendy?
Yeah, I don't like it, and I know it's you kind of naturally come out and say riding horses because it's so entrenched, but I don't like it either. I don't like the riding language. I tend to say sometimes I've said horses that are forced to ride or to be ridden, or people sitting on backs of horses, but it doesn't. Something that Natalie was saying yesterday is about trying to encourage active language, so that we're not saying that the horse is this, we're saying that we are doing this to the horse. So, and I think that's quite an important way of looking at things. Mm-hmm. But it's hard to find it. Yeah. And we're forcing the horses to ride or to be ridden.
Yeah. And even when they talk about her learning to trot and canter, well, of course, it's the horses who are trotting and cantering, and it's the humans who are simply I guess you could say learning how to force the horses to do those things.
Yeah, or coerce maybe might be quite a good choice there. Maybe perhaps coerce the horse.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, I'll just bung this on then. Possible. Next one. There we go. Yeah, because
so here,
the thing about mood and all that, she actually starts saying it could be much more serious than that, doesn't she? It could be an indication of pain, and skeletal problems and this kind of stuff.
I know. And then interestingly there, she points out that a horse can become, and here again with the language, conditioned to suppression, which actually I thought was quite good use of language, because we are conditioning, they are being conditioned, and then eventually they're just giving in. So when people say, oh yeah, they love this and they're well trained and they behave and they really enjoy this, actually no, they've been suppressed and they've given in. So I thought that was actually quite an interesting phrase that they used, because it was quite much more actually closer to the truth.
It's a form of breaking, isn't it? I mean, we talk about breaking horses, don't we?
Yeah, definitely. And it literally is breaking their spirit, isn't it? Until they just can't be bothered to fight anymore, because it's just easier for them.
Yeah, Debbie's saying they become resigned. Yeah, these are all, it all means the same, doesn't it? That their spirit is broken, kind of thing. So, yeah.
Which is just heartbreaking, isn't it? When you think of all the horses out there that have got these, these humans, right, who are sitting on their backs and saying, oh, but they love it. They love being ridden. And you think, yeah. Often when I'm driving, this is really bad. I don't know if I should say this out loud. But often when we're driving by, and usually with Dylan in the car, to take him out for his little exercise, if I see people, and around here there's quite a lot of people who are sitting on horses' backs, I often find myself with the button on the window of the car, and I'm just literally ready, and then Lee will quickly do the button up and go, you were about to, weren't you? I was like, I was, but I'm not. I didn't do it. Keep moving. Because I just get so like, oh yeah, I know, probably I shouldn't do that kind of thing, but
yes, you should. What words were you thinking of doing? Wanker or something worse than that, or what?
Oh, way worse. Yeah, I know, it's very tempting, isn't it? Well, sometimes I just want to say, get off the poor horse's back, you lazy, and walk on your own legs.
You can always use the thing that the Sabs used to do. Oh, that horse has got two arseholes. One under the tail and one on the back. Yeah, right. Okay, so then move this on then. Yeah. So, here's my first bit of highlighting.
Oh, great! We know it's yours because it's green.
Yeah,
it's green.
I made it green, very, very Irish. Yeah. So this is that case that people remember, won't they? There was some pretty graphic footage of this woman really laying into a horse.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so this will come up with what we were talking about before, Carolyn, about the different kind of modes of training and everything, because that's what it's all about. And this particular person went into a very kind of punitive kind of system. But there was something that was said, I think. Oh yeah, and then there was this other example. So these are just giving recent examples, and then there was that famous stuff that we saw of the bloodied horses running down the road in London as well. The weird thing is, though, I mean, like, people are kind of upset about this. I mean, there was an article on National Irish TV. It mentions one coming up on British TV. Then there's a lot of coverage over this, and then there was a lot of coverage over the Olympian who was being very violent. But then it all dies down again, doesn't it? Nothing kind of changes.
It sounds though in the research, if you am I able to move that? Am I able to move it? I don't think I'm able to move it, Doc.
No, you're not. No. Sorry.
Not. No, that's all right. A little bit further up, when they talk about the research that's done, apparently a study was saying that 1 in 5 do not support horses being used in sport. I think it was done by, I don't know if you could you scroll up from
yeah, I could do, yeah. If you see it, tell me.
World Horse Welfare.
That's the one. Yeah, it's just above where you were, just above your green. So it's before. Above. It was before it. Yeah, before it, not after.
Oh, yeah, it was a 2022 survey by World Horse Welfare. And it was talking about horses used in sport, which I would presume doesn't include when humans are using them sort of recreationally.
Yeah, nice. I think, yeah, there it is. 2022. It's right at the start of your green bit. So they, yeah.
When you're looking for these things, you can never see them, can you?
Yeah, so the survey said 1 in 5 people, which I found quite interesting, because I thought that was quite an interesting, or quite maybe a high number from the World Horse Fair world, because you would think that they would be really up for using horses in sport. So for a fifth of people, 20%, isn't it? If I've done my maths right.
Well, I immediately thought about the Grand National. I mean, like, you know, who doesn't support that?
Maybe sport is too generalized as well. Maybe that it's not specific enough. Maybe people are against certain sports but not others.
Yeah, there's a mention of polo later, isn't there? And also dressage.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people don't like dressage. I think.
No, dressage is just, yeah. I mean, we're doing kind of oppression Olympics here by how bad they are, but that is particularly horrific, isn't it? And polo as well. Just when you read the kind of tactics they use to train, so-called train, like oppress the horses into doing certain very alien things to their natural, you know, movement patterns, and the way they hold their heads and the way they move their legs and things, and the way they get them to stop suddenly, and all these kind of things, just quite abhorrent, really, but seen as quite normal.
Yes,
indeed. But what I found interesting in that part that you highlighted was the language of what was it?
Which way is it?
Right at the end of your first green bit.
Oh, just there.
Literally anachronistic.
Oh yeah.
Now the anachronistic, I must confess, I had to look this word up. But it made me think, well, they make anachronistic is basically saying that it's of its day, it's outdated, old-fashioned, that kind of thing, of its time. But then I thought, in a way, this reminds me something that that Jeremy referred to earlier in a different chat that we were in, about the time. We almost put a time factor on things, as if to say, right, now we're in 2024. This is no longer acceptable. We've moved beyond this now. We're better than this. But actually, when you look back, when was this ever morally acceptable? It's never been morally acceptable, really, or it shouldn't be. And yet we feel like we put this time on things, like this is anachronistic now. It was okay back then, but it's not okay now. But really, I think that's very much human supremacy, isn't it? Like, we have to be the ones to evolve in order for them not to be oppressed. It's a really skewed way of thinking, I think.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of how sometimes when we're talking to people who are not vegan, sometimes they will admit that they think that veganism is the future and it's the right thing to do, but they sort of act as though it's not necessarily what they have to do right now. I've noticed that attitude as well.
Yeah, I don't buy it, really, because I mean, it even talks about the household cover and all that, and you know, it's so popular, you know, having a selfie with the horses and stuff, you know, Buckingham Palace and all this kind of stuff, and I just don't buy it that you know, it might be kind of old fashioned in some way, but it's not unpopular, the use of horses. Surely there's so much of it about, as it were.
I'm sure tourists often just see it as very much, I don't know, very quaint to have like all of these horses and soldiers sitting on top of them, and yeah, those at Horse Guards Parade or the ones on Whitehall where they're having to stand still for so long, and I'm so glad that horse bit that person's arm. I'm like, yay, go you! Like, I wish I was there to watch it and just cheer them on, because how dare they? How dare we sit on them and make them stand like this with like crowds of people constantly surging on them and having selfies? And I just, yeah, Can't bear it. It's just awful.
Yeah, and I guess the signs warning the people that horses might bite just goes to show that people don't think about anything from the horse's perspective. They just want their selfie, and they don't think that these individuals are going to end up being bored out of their minds, and and of course they're going to snap. And in fact, it does talk about kind of cumulative triggers in this article, which is quite interesting as well.
Yes.
Which is kind of like if they keep getting niggled at, as it were, all day long, or just irritating things happening all the time, eventually they're going to snap.
Yeah. Which is quite normal, isn't it? Like we all do. If you have one thing after another, micro stresses on your body, on your system, eventually it's overload, it's overwhelm, and then you have to let that out somewhere, don't you? And if you're forced to stand really still, which is it's not their natural way, is it? Just to stand like that.
that saying about straw on a camel's back and all that, because it's not a big thing that does it in the end. It's just the fact that it builds up. All these small things build up.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a whole other species, this term, isn't it? Straw on a camel's back. The straw that broke the camel's back.
I know.
Yeah. It's like the drip of water. I think of it like a drip of water, like the bath's full, and it's that one drip of water that takes the bath over the edge, and then it's all overflowing. It's like
the final drop.
The final
this
drop.
Is another bit I don't buy in the article. Within the horse world, there are some animal rights parts. No, I don't buy that at all. I think it's all just versions of welfare.
What about people who run sanctuaries, though? I suppose they would be included in that?
I'm not sure that they would regard themselves as part of the horse world. In fact, they probably think that they have refugees from the horse world.
I suppose, although they would still have to take care of the horses, and so they might still have to rely on some of the same resources to provide for the horses.
Welcome back, Nella. Hope it wasn't.
You're muted.
You're muted, yeah.
Sorry, I apologize for that, and it took too long, longer than that I thought. The news are not good. Anyway, we'll try to organize a certain rescue as soon as possible. But the fire is still raging, so and the front is huge. So.
It never seems to end. It's one after the other all the time, or just a continuous one, I suppose.
No, we had a break, but the weather continues to be, very warm. So it's still like summer.
I wish I could send you some of our rain over, Nelly. We've had so much rain. Like,
that's amazing at this point.
Send it your way. I know. So sorry to hear that.
Yes. Okay.
But just going back to that rights welfare thing, actually, I actually thought that was quite interesting, because the fact that they actually made the distinction, for me, was surprising in itself, because most people will just talk about rights as an umbrella term for all of it, or they just talk about welfare, but they don't usually make the distinction between rights and welfare. So I thought that was quite interesting. And I guess, to Carolyn's point, there are people in this article who have a very strong, at the end of the spectrum towards the rights, where they're choosing not to sit on the horses' backs, where they're trying to respect the individuals and let them live as naturally as possible. So they would be more, I guess, on that end, but still in the horse world, and as in they're running a sanctuary for horses. So
there's another element that Deb has pointed out. There's some places that call themselves sanctuaries, and they do It's one of the weird things, isn't it? Because that's one of the things that have changed over the generations. Most vegan activists kind of almost like assume that animal sanctuaries are run by vegans, and yet that was very rare. Only 25 years ago, that most animal sanctuaries weren't. So that means would condone some forms of animal use, even though
Yeah, like selling eggs as well. I've heard about that a lot, and running cafes that sell non-vegan friendly items, let's say. But just going back to that language in that yellowed phrase, paragraph there, Doc, custodians. I just challenge this custodian language, because for me, and I don't know if you folks agree, but for me, custodian would connote more of you're custodian of a piece of land or a building, a something, rather than a someone. So even though it's different to owner, which I liked the shift from owner, custodian still for me is not quite what we would like. Custodian is still, you're taking care of a thing rather than a person.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I felt that way when I read the article too.
Should be prison guard, perhaps, but yeah, it. See, I think it's connected to words like stewardship, and of course that is connected to animal welfareism, and that phrase that I mentioned last week, or last time, I should say, by Richard Reiser, which is that humans assume that our fellow animals need superintendents, and so this is similar to that type of idea that. You know, we've got this idea, don't we, that they can't cope on their own. You know, even though there are millions of free living beings, despite our efforts to try and wipe them all out.
Yeah, I think I'd like, because Linda's saying guardians, and I think I definitely prefer guardians to custodians, caregivers, maybe even allies. I quite like the word ally. People are allies to the horses would be quite nice, wouldn't it?
What would we say in cases where the horses are being exploited? Because then it wouldn't, then we might want to use language that indicates that the horses, it is an exploitative relationship. I mean, I sometimes even wonder if the word owner could be used in a way. I mean, it's a tricky one, right? But if horses are legally owned as property, then the word owner, it depends on the context. But like if we're talking amongst animal advocates who normally would shy away from using the word owner, then using the word owner could perhaps be a bit troubling for us. Like it might not be troubling for the general non-vegan public. They might just think, oh yeah, they're this owner. But for us as animal advocates, we would find that kind of a troubling term, which could help to remind us that it is a hierarchical relationship. I'm wondering what you think about that.
I do. I think I've tried to steer away from owner so much that it really grates me now. I mean, I think the only way I could possibly use it is if I was, putting it in the old bunny ears, so-called owner, and making a point that that's what the standard language is, but it's problematic. I think I would use it in that way, only that way. But I guess amongst us, we would talk about those who are oppressing horses, or exploiting, if you like the exploitation word. I guess in this kind of article, it'd be, what would we use here if we were actually doing it? I think I'd still opt for something like, we could say guardians who consider themselves owners. I don't know. Is that too clumsy? It's just, it's difficult to find one word that fits, isn't it, sometimes?
How about the zoological notion of keeper?
Keeper, yeah. Even then, would you want to put that in the bunny ears?
Yeah, I had a problem when I was writing my PhD, and when I started writing articles. I used to put owner, bunny rabbit ears, and I also in my PhD I had the word pet in quotation marks, and then I took them out because I realized that that's actually legally what they are. And so, there was no point in kind of problematizing something that was legally real.
I guess
No, sorry, Carolyn, you go ahead.
Okay, well, some people would perhaps say that if we use words like guardian in contexts that are more oppressive, then that could be seen as a euphemism, perhaps. And I sort of wonder, especially since some people in the vegan community still support the practice of pet keeping, my concern there would be that we would sort of sanitize it by just swapping out the word pet, or swapping out the word owner for guardian, or swapping out the word pet for companion, when there's still oppression going on there, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, no, I do exactly. I suppose it would. I suppose it's whether you can get to explain, or if it's clear that you're using that in a almost highlighting the ownership, as in it's ownership, but we're not happy about this kind of way. I like Louisa's suggestion of horse user, but then I guess we would see that as, use is problematic, whereas I guess some people would go, they're just a user, like an iPhone user. So because they would see it as normal. And I guess this is really interesting, because how you read the word and interpret it depends on what glasses you've got on. And if you're looking at it through vegan spectacles, you see words very differently to how everyone else sees it. And it's almost like we're trying to put on our own spectacles and then put on the non-vegan spectacles as well, and then our vegan spectacles on top of that, because we're trying to see all these like prisms of language as we look at it all. How do we see it? Then how do they see it? How do we see it? Do they see it? That goes on and on. It's quite complex, isn't it?
We ought to get loads of vegan spectacles and just give them to people. Have a look at the world through those.
Oh my God, that would be amazing, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
If we could create a pill, literally like the Matrix red pill, and just say, please take this. And just overnight, people would.
When I saw this word equitation, I thought this might be close to kind of cognitive ethology, this idea that people have started to research in terms of looking at how our fellow animals organize society, because we're going back to that point about it's most things that we know about our fellow animals is how to exploit them. And most science has been based on how to keep them, exploit them, use them, and all that thing. Cognitive ethology broke that. And I first thought that this equitation science was the same, but I think it's really just about training, from what I can gather. So that was a bit of a letdown.
Yeah, this equitation science thing, I hear what you're saying there, because it's almost like they're trying to better understand horses and the pressures that humans place on them. For example, like looking at cheekiness or misbehaving is actually maybe now more like understood as anxiety and stress. So I think that can be seen in a positive way, because we understand horses better and what they're trying to communicate to us. But then also I've got two kind of threads that come out of that which are problematic, which one is, should we actually need to always understand how another person is feeling or what their motivations are in order to respect them, in order to respect their bodily autonomy, their inherent rights, their self-determination? Because this is a problem, I think, with science, is like, it's almost like we assume we can do whatever we want until we found the science to prove otherwise. And I feel like it should be the other way around. Like, let's just respect everyone, because why are we not? And like, why do we need to have things in order to prove and give evidence that, and the more evidence we get, we've got this bit of evidence now, so now we should respect this individual. And actually, even that, we've got so much evidence already that we don't respect these individuals, despite the mountains of evidence that we have anyway of that we should be. And then the second problem I have with that as well is, it just seems, and I think this is what you were saying as well, Doc, is that we're using all this information just to be able to oppress them in a different way. So we're still going to oppress them. It's a bit like the equivalent of high welfare so-called meat, that if we can treat them really, really, really well and learn how to train the horses really well and treat them in a way that's much more supposedly respectful of them, then we can keep oppressing them, and it's much more acceptable and normalized. Then for other people are going to be on board with it because it's seen as high welfare. So it's very again, it's a very skewed view, I think, this equitation science.
Yes, indeed. Now we're just over the hour, so I presume we're continuing.
I think we're nearly. Oh no, we're not. We're loads away, aren't we?
We're page 2 of 7. Yes.
This is a long article. I was thinking we're nearly at the end there, but we're not.
No, I'm afraid not. No. So anyway, I will move it on. See again, how clever horses can be at masking their pain. And again, that's kind of part of being defeated, I suppose, that kind of broken idea. But again, it goes to show that we don't know that much about the beings who we're exploiting, you know. And I think there's another thing that emphasizes that a little later on. And then you got this bit that you highlighted, Wendy, in the yellow again.
Yeah, just that whole thing of misbehaving. It's all about, making the horse compliant, submissive, obedient. Again, it's that human supremacy, that relationship of domination, but that's seen as a good thing. And but this again brings up so many questions, because this is similar, and now there's a lot more emphasis on positive reinforcement in order to get horses to be compliant, and it's the same with dogs as well. And living with Big D Dog, Bobby Dazzler, raises a lot of issues around this, because
I haven't heard that phrase for a long time. Bobby Dazzler.
Well, Bobby Dazzler. He gets called Dilly Bobs, and then it becomes Bobby Dazzler. So he's got so many names. But it does bring about, and I know that many of you here who are watching will have these kind of situations where sometimes there's some things you need to be able to get the person you're caring for, the ally to get them to do, in order to be safe, or in order to be able to function in the human world that we have, the species as well that we have. And it messes with you a lot, definitely does me. But there are definitely things that you have to so-called train them to do in order to be safe, and make decisions for them all the time. And it's very easy to sit and go, right, that should never be done. But sometimes there are things you kind of have to. And I wonder if it's the same in the horse world. Deb, I don't know about for you. We'd love to hear from Deb on that, because Deb cares for refugee horses. And I wonder if there are some things like that for you, Deb, where there are things you have to get them to do and be compliant in.
Well, of course, people are going to immediately think of children as well, aren't they? That we do that with children. And in fact, one of the irritating things about our attitude to our fellow animals is that we often regard them in the same kind of bracket often as human children, and that kind of leads to infantilization, because we almost like impose childishness on them for their entire life, and we almost refuse to let them grow up and be adults.
Yeah,
that really frustrates me. So I think Debbie's saying that's true, Wendy.
Yeah, I imagine with a horse that's on an even bigger scale.
Yeah, and there's Alan making the children point as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so this book is still for sale. There's loads of books on horses. That goes to show how popular. Oh, and going back to this bit about equitation science, this actually little paragraph is actually taken from the Wikipedia page, the font of knowledge. So if you do want to know more about this, then there is a Wikipedia page. That's all I was going to say. Right. Yeah, it's talking about this military heritage in equestrianism in Britain.
It's easy for you to say. Say it again, Doc. What was you saying?
But this, equitarianism.
That one. It's a long word, isn't it? Equestrianism.
Yeah. Anyway.
You've got to put your teeth in.
This is very relevant to the movement, I think, here, because if we think of animal welfareists or cultural specialists who are well trained in animal welfare ideas, because that's what they hear, that's what they grow up with, that's how they're socialized, this applies to them because they've kind of learnt for 30 years, all this stuff, and then along comes a vegan and tries to kind of move it around. So I thought that this was very relevant to just our kind of animal advocacy in general. It's taken you 30 years to feel like you finally become an expert in your field, and everybody in society is an animal welfare expert, and they're all against animal cruelty and all against animal abuse and all the rest of it, and it's what they've grown up with, and it's what they know, and yet they're not opposed to animal use. And then we come along and add that bit to it, and here's the kind of thing about, well, here's somebody with some new fresh ideas about horses, challenging the traditional way of looking at things, and that challenge can be difficult because it's taken so long just to get to where they were in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Hope that made sense.
Yeah, it's like people devote their lives to horseback riding, and then we come along and say this is wrong, and that can I can see how people would become defensive. But I mean, we still have to say it anyway.
I think it's really interesting you said horseback riding, because
Oh.
no, it's just that there's a British comedian who said that it's really interesting if you think about Canada or USA, that they say horseback riding, whereas we say horse riding.
Oh.
Right. And he was making, I mean, he's a comedian, right? And so he was making the joke that North Americans have to be told where to sit on the horse, kind of thing. And he also said that we say glasses and they say eyeglasses, in case put them over the nose or whatever. And so, it's like sidewalk. Anyway, I better get off that thread because it's.
Oh.
So here's,
I just can I just go back to that little bit, actually, just going back, because it reminded me of something that came up at the weekend on one of the panels to do with so-called animal research experimentation, in that the whole thing about new ideas are challenging to long-standing experts. And this is why I think it's hard to change anything, because things would get so entrenched in systems and institutions. And this came up on trying to end vivisection, is that it's the same thing. Like people, like activists, point out that we've got, from Victorian times, we've got different modes of transport, we've got different ways of dressing, different ways of speaking, but our ways of testing for drugs and cosmetics and all of this stuff is the same, like stuck in that old model of using other animals in the experimentation. But how in that industry it's so entrenched, and it's like all these new scientists are coming up with amazing, innovative new ways that are preferable to the other animal model, and yet the expertise
thing, though, Wendy, isn't it, that the new ways are scary because people get set in their ways. It's a little bit like when the heavy industry in Britain closed down, and then there was this idea of retraining steel workers and the shipbuilders and the miners and all that, and that led to a kind of a crisis of masculinity, because they found themselves back at school. So there they were, expert miners and expert shipbuilders. Suddenly they're back in a college situation, being talked to by middle-class kind of teacher-type people, and they felt very threatened by that. And so Hans Royce made the point about vivisection in 1979. He said that anybody could cut up a rat, but if you've got a sophisticated computer system to deal with, that's going to maybe take a level of expertise that you don't have. And so that in itself is a break to change, isn't it?
Yeah, well, they were saying, the point was that I was going to say is that they were saying that they will come along with these amazing new models, and they're really effective, efficient, and then the kind of department or whatever they have to kind of go through and jump through the hoops will go, yes, but can you do it on a mouse? And they always go back to that, can you make it work on a mouse? So it's so entrenched in that way of thinking that it's almost like they won't even be open to this new way at all, because it's like, no, this is the way, this is the gold standard. And it won't even consider that anything else exists. So yeah, it's very, very challenging. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
Shall we move on, folks?
The prey animals was interesting, wasn't it? I don't know how we feel about that language. That's why I highlighted that bit, by the way, prey. What we often talk about prey animals. I just wonder what people think about that language. Because it's kind of giving them a little bit of a role. That's their identity. That's how, it's very one-dimensional. I don't know.
It seems to suggest almost that that's all that they are, and that's what worries me about that language. Like saying that's, they were just meant to be preyed upon.
Well, isn't it also a recognition that there are some individuals who are obligate carnivores? So if we look at it from an ecological point of view, as it were, so there's that way of doing it. So I'm a bit torn on that, because obviously if it was, humans being the predator, that's a problem. But in their kind of natural situation, as it were, then they really are that, because they're preyed upon in a way that, say, a lion isn't.
Maybe it's different to say they're being preyed upon than actually saying they're prey animals, because that's more of an active language, isn't it?
With that. Yeah.
And or an animal, another animal is being predatory in that moment. They've got predatory behavior in that moment, rather than they are a predator, because that's totally defining them by that one trait or one behavior.
Hey, look at this. This is why the Animal Rights Show is special, because our audience thinks, which is great, isn't it?
Yay!
Right. So this is a long bit of yellow from you, Wendy.
Was it? Was this from? Oh right, yeah. Okay, yeah. I thought mine was purple, but I don't know where yellow came from. But I think this was just language points, like obviously the it. Horses tell that the riders love being ridden. Oh yes, this was saying that talking about false narratives. It kind of makes the point that there are false narratives that exist as well, and it's not necessarily that people are intentionally cruel, and recognizing that horses don't necessarily love being ridden with humans on their backs, but they just like running. And also they of course love running, so it's not that they don't need a human on their back, generally speaking, to run. They can do that themselves. Thank you very much. I'm sure they were doing that way before humans decided to plunk themselves on their backs. And also the recognizing the language, the it. So sometimes there's like recognition of a point which is quite positive in this article, where they're recognizing the horse's perspective, but then still calling them it, which I find a little bit disappointing from the Wheeler character, given that they're running the sanctuary for the horses. I would love to maybe reach out to them and say, could we maybe start calling the horses he, she, they, rather than it, from that perspective. Oi, Wheeler!
I want a word in your shell, like. Right. Okay. Let's move on then.
Oh, sorry, that bit. Yes, this is where when we talk about the love language in the movement, we often talk about how it's so subjective, and this makes the point. Nearly every single one of the people who are sitting on the horses' backs, forcing them to ride, love their horses, and they actually make the point. Love takes different shapes and forms, and that's the whole point. We can't rely on love as as something to form our advocacy around, because it's very subjective.
And it makes a very critical point about that right at the end, doesn't it? Which is really interesting. That's virtually the last line, I believe. So, yeah, very good. So then you've got a lot of, well, obviously we didn't. Oh, this is the bit that you were talking about earlier, Carolyn, about the SLO.
Yeah, before we went live. Yeah, so I thought this was really interesting, this concept of social license to operate. So it says SLO refers to the perceptions of local stakeholders that a project, company, or industry that operates in a given area is socially acceptable or legitimate. So in this sense, it becomes about trying to convince the public that riding on horses' backs, oppressing them in this way, is good for them, is a positive activity, rather than being about actually being concerned about the horses themselves. It becomes more about public relations.
Yeah, this is a real kind of subtext to this article, I think, is the fact that, for the rest of the article, it's all really based on what you said, kind of, so long as we can get the public to think it's okay, or, to see it this way, then, then everything's going to be grand. We might have to not change too much, something like that,
Mm-hmm. Also quite interesting because we're constantly comparing how we treat, for want of a better word, other animals while we're using them to parenting. But actually, I don't think parenting is that amazing out there from what you see of the state of the human world. Like, where's parenting is obviously not doing that great things out there, considering how the human children are growing up into the adults that we are and the socialization that we've got. Yeah, I'm kind of questioning parenting has been held upon this amazing pedestal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this is where I mentioned dressage, and this is where they were ascribed a job, as you were saying before, Wendy, and Carolyn. I think dressage horses as opposed to horses forced into that particular thing. I mean, it's dressage is so odd that I do think of all the uses of horses, it makes people think, doesn't it? Kind of blindly, how did they get the horse to do that? It immediately focuses on that, I think.
Yeah, definitely. That and polo, which I think they come onto quite soon. Polo and dressage, particularly quite horrendous for the horses, for the so-called training.
Mm-hmm. And then you've got that bit that we've referred to before already. This bit about what a rider wants to achieve. So again, that's that's the overarching kind of thing that's going on.
But it's making the point here that the horses have no sovereignty over themselves.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, obviously an important point. They have no say as an athlete, that they don't get to choose.
That's interesting, isn't it? As an athlete.
As an athlete, yeah.
Quite an interesting language, isn't it?
Because often I think in these sports they do talk about the horses as athletes, and later on, one of the people that they're quoting talks about the horses maximizing their potential. I think it's someone, a pro racing person, and they're saying that about maximizing their potential, which actually is a very strange way of looking at it, because again, there's no consent there's no choice there. We may be able to say that what it makes you question then, what is an athlete and other horses athletic? I guess they may be athletic in their their stamina, their strength, their skill, or whatever, but we would see an athlete as someone who chooses that route. Like any one of us could have maybe chosen to become an athlete, but we haven't. And the horses don't get, maybe we all have the potential.
But we do talk about human athletes as thoroughbreds, don't we? So, there's a mixture of language there being used.
Do we really? I've not heard that for humans, but yeah, possibly we do.
Yeah, the elite human athletes are often called thoroughbreds, I think.
Oh, right. I suppose are they referring back to, in a way, horses?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. I see what you mean. Yeah. Got you.
So this is your polo that you wanted to talk about. Your polo mints, are they vegan?
I think they are now.
Are they, right?
I don't really eat sweets and stuff much, but I think they are. But this is interesting because there's going to be a Netflix documentary capturing the full story of polo, what it takes to compete the horse's level. And someone said here, hopefully this will cover the horse perspective as well as the human one. But will it? I wonder. I don't know if that's out already, but it'd be interesting to see, because I doubt very much it covers much of the horse perspective, but it might try to. I mean, I guess we can never really cover the horse perspective because only the horse could do that themselves, but we could try to be empathetic about it.
Yeah, I wonder what this reference to locked on is. I mean, obviously, that's a technical phrase within the sport, presumably, but part of their training, locking them on and getting trained to follow the ball.
Yeah, I guess it's that pure focus, maybe. Like, don't get distracted from the ball. They're just zoned in, maybe. Do you think that's what it might be?
Could be, couldn't it? Jeremy is talking about athlete bull riding article. Oh, right.
Yeah. Actually, a bit later in this horse article, there's a quote from the British Horse Racing Authority, BHA. A spokesperson had said, "Our sport gives these athletes purpose, an unparalleled quality of life, and world-class care that allows them to maximize their potential." And so, again, it's sort of almost assuming that the horses enjoy being used. It's assuming that it's what they're meant to do and all that.
Right. Okay.
I was thinking that there is, a whole narrative that's perpetuated around dressage and polo and these so-called sports. Even in literature, I'm thinking of several authors and novels that use this as their topic, and it rarely depicts the truth. Only as an exemption, like the bad rider who abuses the horse, and it's all presented as very benign. And I'm thinking that this is what most people have in mind when they hear about this. I don't want to say sports because I don't believe they are, but you get the point. And it seems to be really embedded in certain cultures. And I'm wondering if there had been reactions from animal rights groups when these so-called sports got to be Olympic sports. Does anyone know?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I'm having in mind, probably you have to authors like Gilly Cooper, but they wrote, tens of books on the topic, and supporting this, this service of abuse.
Yeah, you would almost expect a welfare campaign about dressage, at least, wouldn't you? And polo, because polo's got the kind of royal tag to it, hasn't it? Elite sport.
Oh yes.
In fact, it says, doesn't it, the elite world of polo. It's a bit of James Bond, and it's kind of, it's up there, isn't it? You can think of various types of royalty engaging with that, and I suppose it's also expensive to take part in. I would think.
Yeah, I think so, and I think expensive to go and watch as well. And a little bit like, I think it's I think the events around horses in these industries of oppression tend to be a little bit more elitist, don't they? I think, like you're saying, there with
there is a classist element there.
The classist element, like the same with the races as well, like going, to Ascot or to Epsom and all of that. I think it's become probably less so now, but I think it used to be especially very much elitist. And Ladies' Day, when ladies dress up and all with the hats on and the posh clothes and all of that stuff. And polo, I think, is a little bit like that as well. It's a little bit more classist and elitist.
Yeah, you can't go to polo with your tracksuit on. We're coming up to parts of the thing where they talk about regulation and welfare and all that kind of stuff. And there's two examples. One is polo itself, and then there's this thing about this Spanish riding school. And they seem to think that they're making a welfare point by saying that, which doesn't say anything welfare. It doesn't seem to me. It just says that they're doing a traditional method of exploitation, right? That's all that's saying.
And the last sentence, to experience, this made me laugh actually, to experience the partnership between our riders and horses during their training. And I thought, what kind of partnership is it when you're training someone like that? It just completely, for me to fight, it's almost like a nonsensical sentence to have a partnership where one is, in a position of domination over the other. That's not really a partnership, is it? I would say. Call me old-fashioned.
Well, and if one partner breaks their leg, they're going to be shot. Whereas if the other does, they won't. So. So this bit that it's in green, I didn't buy that as well, because there's interesting bits later on when it's talk about kind of the horse business, but also zoos and then circuses as well. Is horse racing in an existential crisis? I mean, is it under threat of its existence? It doesn't seem to be to me.
Maybe there are rumblings within these sort of institutions and systems that we don't really know about. Maybe things are changing and shifting that we're not really aware on the outside of them. I guess that could be possible, but it seems to still be very profitable business, doesn't it? And it says under that it's made viable because enough people see horses, this was interesting language, as betting objects rather than as sentient beings. So again, interesting contrast of language and putting that in there, objects and sentience.
I don't think it's a common thing for cultural species to see our fellow animals as sentient beings in any context of their use. Do you? I mean, it's something that we've got to keep pointing out, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But interesting that the journalist acknowledges that as well, which I think that's why I think in some places this article seemed a little bit more aware, not perfect in any way whatsoever, but just a little bit more awareness of some of the issues. Speciesism. Yeah.
And then it goes through the see, I wonder whether what it really means is existential crisis. No, it's not that. It's the fact that the industry is under scrutiny, and that it just means that, and they've just used that language instead because it goes then to it's under surveillance. We're kind of monitored type of thing.
Yeah, they're trying to figure out maybe how to save their public image from being ruined.
Yeah, which is again is another theme of the entire article, isn't it? So yeah. So then you've got two bits in purple, and these are yours as well, Wendy.
Just language, really. Overproduction is that sense of producing foals. Of course, they're born like any babies. They're not produced. So I guess it's, and I know we talk about producing babies, but I just find that language just
units of production.
Yeah, and the thoroughbred thing.
And then you've got this bit about retiring, which is interesting language.
Retiring. like they had a choice in the first place. Oh, I chose to be an athlete, now I'm retiring from sport altogether. You can just, it's just like nonsensical, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, indeed. And then you've got a long bit in you've got a lot of yellow coming up now. So you got the animal welfare group for animal aid, and then it talks about the person who works for them a little bit later, doesn't it? I think. But yeah.
I think was.
So this is talking about the fact that there's been a kind of expose on British TV, I think. And it was Animal Aid that got the undercover or covert footage.
Yeah, and that was the bit that we were talking about earlier and that Carolyn highlighted as well, the quote about maximizing their potential and them being athletes. We kind of already talked a little bit about that anyway. The one underneath that, just scrolling up a little bit, they're a social species, and when their needs were being met, one of the things the police officers reported was that they felt their horses were more brave. And what they were really starting to do was to have the welfare to be able to buffer the work they do for us. This whole section here, again, goes into almost giving the horses more of what they need in order that they can serve us. But one of the interesting language points, if you can scroll up for me a little bit more, Doc, was that they talk about freedom. Do they have friends, forage, and freedom? How are we meeting those needs so they can serve us? And again, it's that contrast of the language, talking about the horse's freedom to serve us. They put these kind of contrasting, conflicting, almost paradoxical language points together.
Like freedom.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like it's just, again, they're not. How are they free if they're serving us? It doesn't quite work like that.
And then we've got the bit about flight animals. That's another way of saying prey, isn't it? So, so that's another. The language is interesting, isn't it? So then there's another. This is a third reference, I think, to kind of an existential crisis or something, and this is where they start making parallels with zoos and circuses back in the 1960s, which is quite interesting. Again, it goes to show how long it takes to do anything about these goddamn exploitation businesses, isn't it? The kind of critique of circuses starts in the 1960s, and they're still around, and so of course are zoos. And I think going back to this thing about the public and that kind of theme or sub theme of the article, they're kind of suggesting that the zoos have handled the problem of public relations better than the circuses.
Yeah, talking about reassuring the public.
Yeah, and the zoos worked at it, and and then you've just got pure welfare. Then that they created enrichment, and as usual, a culturally speciesist society can be bought off with welfare improvements, which is exactly why a lot of them are done. And often it's kind of, well, we give them a few toys, going back to that infantilization point. It's really kind of interesting how we construct our fellow animals, isn't it?
I don't think this is accurate, what the journalist is describing, because in my opinion, those prisons did not really work at it, but it's easier to fool the audience, because the exploitation in circuses is so blatant and often so cruel that it's difficult to hide. On the other hand, in the zoos, they can actually hide it and do very few, and just to be able to say that they did something about it.
Yeah, and then they've got this bit here, which Deb has picked up on as well. That they've also, the zoos have got this conservation line that the circuses would find a lot harder to kind of trot around, this kind of spin doctoring kind of thing. So the last bit they did was conservation. Circuses, by contrast, did little to react to the change in public perception. So I think that's true. They would both react with welfare and then with enrichments, but the zoos had the conservation angle, which the circuses didn't, which must have been a major difference.
And again, it comes probably down to that categorization as well, that certain categories of use are more acceptable than others, doesn't it? Like like it's the same in so-called animal research or experimentation, whatever we want to call it, in that people will always accept research in the name of medical interventions, medication, saving lives, whereas for cosmetics or other products, household products, they'll say, oh no, actually that's abhorrent, we shouldn't be testing cosmetics on other animals because that's not as necessary as they see like the medical side of things. So it kind of goes down to the category of what the use is for. So I guess it's entertainment seems a bit more frivolous, whereas these other animals are captive, but we're helping them in some way, which actually is usually bullshit anyway. Sorry, Bulls.
The next bit I thought was really interesting. Instead of patting the horse, Ashton says that riders should scratch them at the base of their neck. Now, how long have we been oppressing horses, and we haven't even learned that? You know, when you talk about not knowing much about those you exploit, I mean, you would have thought that if this is the case, then there's a big difference, right, between scratching and patting, because I mean, you always see that, don't you? Whenever you see film of humans interacting with horses, they're patting them and not scratching them, right? So I just thought this is really interesting. You know, we've been exploiting them for so long, but we haven't learned much about them. You know, in this kind of fundamental sense, I just thought, wow. And then you got another yellow bit for you, Wendy.
Oh, this is interesting because this is, I think Dean Stanzor, anti-racing campaigner, was very much pro-racing until he witnessed a horse being shot after after the horse broke her leg, and or his leg, their leg, and then went completely onto the side, and now does a lot of anti-race campaigning. But he cares for two horses who used to be forced to race, and actually, although he's very much against and takes an abolitionist stance on forcing horses to ride or race, he actually does sit on the back of one of the horses because Barton Legend, I think he's called. He has two horses, Devil's Bite and Barton Legend, because he says that just the way that can we scroll up a little bit, or just so I can read it, if that's okay? Thank you. Yeah, there we go. He has exercise-induced pulmonary hemorrhage, and he has to be ridden to keep his bones and muscles actively moving. It would be my preference not to, but we've got to get the weight off him or his laminitis will set in. And I've heard this kind of framing from other people who have sanctuaries with horses, who say that they don't want to ride them. They think riding is immoral, and yet they are sometimes forced to do it because of the way the horses have been manipulated in the way that their bodies are, and they need exercise. And also makes the point that in nature, horses would cover a lot of mileage together in a group. They would run together, but they'd cover a lot of mileage, whereas when they're kept in captivity, they don't have the space to run as much as they probably would. So it's an interesting point, because I would always advocate against sitting on the back of a horse, and I guess sometimes someone who knows maybe more than I do about horses might say, actually, for this particular individual, this is going to help them. So it's just an interesting point from a vegan perspective.
Yeah, the bit I picked out in green, I just thought was really interesting language, because talking about getting the weight off by sitting on the back, putting the weight on to get the weight off.
Yeah.
Which I thought, going back to this guy working for the welfare group Animal Aid, this bit about that bit in green, kind of, you know, the Grand National would make the front page. You're more likely to read about how many horses died at the event. Is that true? I mean, like, you know, the groups complain that that's often hidden, don't they?
I'm not sure now. I'm not sure of what's been happening, especially since Animal Rising have been, you know, invading the courses and things like that. I'm not sure. I don't really read the tabloids very much, so I don't know what the front pages are doing with that.
No,
lately.
and I think if you do include the number of deaths in a report, it's liable to be fairly low down, you know, in the report, which basically means that not a lot of people will get that far, because, you know, we know that a lot of people will just read the first 2 or 3 paragraphs and that's it. They've read the article then.
Yeah.
Some people in the chat are pointing out that, you know, are expressing, you know, are critical of this idea that we have to ride, or that some horses have to be ridden. I also feel very skeptical of this idea. I mean, I know that some people might say, you know, they know more about horses than we do, but I still can't really accept this idea that we should be riding on horses' backs. Like, surely there has to be another way, like Cormac says here.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I'm sure, because you can run with them, you can have them. Actually, the sanctuary that I was spending a lot of time at until Dylan came to live, and Dylan was from that sanctuary, funnily enough. But actually, they had a group of horses there, and sadly, one of the horses who used to be a horse forced to race is no longer with us. Had to be had an accident and had to be killed, which was so heartbreaking. But he came to live there, and he used to get all the horses running, and they had like 3 fields to run through, and it was just mesmerizing to watch them. And they used to have such a good time just running together around these fields, back and forward and up and down. It was just amazing. And I guess it's trying to find, I think it's like anything. If we don't look for other options, we won't find them. But I think if you come from that vegan perspective of, let's find a way that does not you know, violate this individual, there must be other ways. There must be. Maybe you're just not looking for the ways. I don't know. That surely there is. I agree. I would agree with that.
I think there's a lot of disingenuous points that are often made. You know, horse keepers often will say that they've got a symbiotic relationship with their horses, and so I used to argue, well, if you went down to you know, a large beach, then you could just, you know, run with them and, you know, let them off. They go, well, they'll run away then. I said, well, what happened to the symbiotic relationship you've got with them? And, you know, you all love each other, and, you know, you trust each other, and you want to be with each other and all that. And you're now saying that if I'm not actually sat on their back, they're going to escape from me. You can't be both ways. Right. Anyway, that was, oh yeah, no, there's a little bit here. We're on the last page, I think, Wendy.
I think we are. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a long one, wasn't it?
I think this point here is often made by non-vegans, isn't it? This idea that you're better off in captivity. I mean, I assume that if you put every human into prison, they probably would, you know, quite a lot of them are going to live longer than if they were roaming around free in all the traffic and all the rest of it. And so, but I think this is also part of that thing that we saw earlier on when the industry was talking about their optimum life and this kind of stuff. That they've got that in mind, the fact that, you know, by providing them with the veterinary care which they would have got as a free living being and all the rest of it, you know, it's a common thing that is said to vegans by non-vegans, isn't it? Oh yeah, but I mean, they're not going to live as long if they're free living.
But this is a very anthropocentric way of thinking. We have no way to know if our fellow animals prefer freedom or safety, and you know, willing to bet that they prefer freedom. If we watch what happens to them when they are free and they can decide for themselves, I think it's pretty clear they cherish freedom. So if humans or some humans prefer safety over freedom, that's a different thing. But this is not even true for all humans. So how can it be true for other species?
Yeah, I mean, we often do a lot of risky things because that's where we get some of our main enjoyment. You know, I mean, I'm not suggesting that horses would volunteer to go bungee jumping or anything, but the point is we do. It's not as though not taking risks is a major priority for humans. I mean, otherwise we'd never get on public transport, let alone drive around in these little tin kind of vehicles that move at a million kilometers an hour. You know what I mean? So yeah, I don't buy that really.
Also, we've got to remember that the world that any of these individuals live in at the moment is a world that's just been overtaken by humans. So it's not like, oh, this is a world that's ideal for any of these individuals. Like they're saying it's a hard life. It's probably a hard life mostly for most of them because of the world we've created around them and forced them to live in. Do you know what I mean? Like
I do know what you mean. This last bit. Do they merely become companions? Who would provide for them? Well, I mean, this is an interesting one. I think that for an industry, if say the horse exploiting industry, put it that way, is closed down, I would think it would be a government responsibility to pay for their housing and accommodation in a sanctuary kind of situation, perhaps. But obviously, people who could afford to keep them would, as companions or just as refugees. And this goes back to the thing that always crops up in just about everything that we interact with non-vegans, is the fact that it's a functional point of view. That they've got to play some function for our benefit. Otherwise, why would we bother? This is kind of what's saying, who would provide for them if they weren't giving us what we get from them now, right? Again, it's a question of changing the mindset. It's not as though people who run the sanctuaries need our fellow animals to do things for them or provide things for them. They are there caring for them for their own benefit.
That was the point. I don't know if you remember, if any of you heard an interview with Sandra Higgins, actually, when the campaign came out with the lamb with the knife to the throat and a child is dying for your dinner, a terrified child is dying for your dinner. Sandra did an interview, or rather a chat on the radio, and one of the callers, who I think was a so-called farmer, said to her, and was really genuine in this question, but I don't understand, like, you're caring for all these sheeps, but yet you get nothing at the end of it. Like, why would you do that? Because obviously in their mind, they might care for the sheeps, but at the end of the day, they're going to kill them and get something from them because they get something out of it. Whereas for sanctuary, people, they don't get anything out of it. And he was just completely baffled by that concept.
Yeah, well, Joe Duffy, the presenter of that one, he couldn't get past the child bit. Yeah, because that was the lamb and the child kind of thing, and they found the language. Like, I mean, Sandra was on national TV in Ireland, and the presenter kept stopping her because she was saying words like residents. She said, "Oh, just to be clear for everybody, you mean the animals, right?" And then she also talked about individuals and said, well, just to be clear for people, you mean the animals, right? And Sandra's going, yeah, our individual residents.
Yeah.
Now this is that reference to the sanctuary in Devon. You're familiar with this sanctuary, Wendy? 600 residents. That must be
Yeah, it's huge, and obviously so expensive as well to run. But I bet those horses have a lovely time together.
Is it very kind of physically large place then? Must be, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't know how big, but it definitely. I think it's grown over time, but definitely big, and it must be and has to be with that amount of horses, I guess.
Yes. Okay. Right. Now this is the end, folks. So, 2 bits that you've highlighted. This is your grand finale, Wendy.
Well, comes back to the old lovers language. Are we a nation of horse lovers or horse riders? So actually, obviously, we've already said we don't really like the language horse riders, but also going back to that whole concept of framing things around being animal lovers, as if this is something that we should be, really striving for. Because if we're all animal lovers, then of course everyone's going to be absolutely fine, and it just doesn't work like that. It's a very subjective term. As they said earlier in the article, love comes in all shapes and sizes. We can't base everything around that. So it's not like the horse lover thing is the preferable thing, and then horses will all be okay and they'll all be free. So it's again making that juxtaposition of that's hard to say at this time of night after a long weekend. That juxtaposition of two pieces of language, lovers or riders, one or the other. And some people who consider themselves riders would also consider themselves lovers as well, which is interesting. But the final piece here, get to know your horse without getting on its back. I like some of this and not the other. I love the fact that the people who run the sanctuary with the 21 horses are saying get to know your horse without getting on their back. But I would obviously prefer if they hadn't used the it word and said their back instead. But good to finish on that more positive note of actually taking the horse's perspectives and thinking about a relationship where we don't have to dominate and control.
This bit is almost a lesson for animal rising, it seems to me, because that's the kind of question that they could ask. Instead of stating that Britain is a nation of animal lovers, they could question whether it is. I mean, if Britain isn't a nation of horse lovers, what would a nation of horse haters look like, given the exploitation that they go through? In this nation of animal lovers, you tell that to those going into slaughterhouses or vivisection laboratories. Oh, don't worry, we're a nation of animal lovers. It's rather empty, isn't it? Phrase.
It really is.
It really is.
It really is.
Okay, I can drop this out now then. Hey.
I feel like we've just done some kind of dissertation, analysing the article.
Right. So, yes, our work is done, people. Obviously, I think it's important that we thank Carolyn for coming back for the third time and putting up with us yet again. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show again.
Oh, it's our pleasure, Carolyn. So great to have you on. You're a great guest panelist.
Is there anything in the chat that we've missed? I don't think so, really.
It was a really lively chat. It was so I couldn't keep up with everything, but it was really lively. Some great discussions there. I was really curious as to what Navia was going to say. Navia said, "I want to say something, but I better not." And then I was my endless curiosity was like really spiked by that. I was like, what was Navia going to say? I don't know, but yes, some really great comments. Thank you, everyone, for interacting. Well,
you did that before yourself, didn't you? I wanted to shout something out the window, but I thought I better not. Yeah,
I know.
Right. Well, Nella, hope things are not going to develop in a so bad way up your neck of the woods. So good luck if you.
I'll keep you posted, but it seems really bad.
Yeah. So it's kind of never good, is it, when you've got large scale fires and free living beings? I mean, talk about a bad mix.
A very unusual time of the year, and I imagine that even the other animals were not prepared for that. Not that they are ever prepared for that, but in some ways this was some kind of. They must have felt like an ambush to them. I mean, it's almost October.
Well, I don't envy that task that you've taken on at all, because I know it's a strain emotionally. I know that. So
heart-wrenching, but yeah, good luck, Nana. Take care, and keep us posted.
I'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah.
And on that uplifting note of widespread fires and free living beings, thanks for everybody who's stayed with us. And thanks for those who watch the recording afterwards. And we shall be back with another animal rights show soon. Let's put it that way.
Yay, soon, definitely.